Okay, there we go. We should be live.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right.
If anyone's here.
Anybody and everybody, we are here.
Welcome.
It looks like, I wonder if we're just talking to ourselves, but maybe we're not. I'm going to go check YouTube. Anyone, if you're listening and you can see us and hear us, give us a comment in YouTube so we know you're here and you can hear us. It's the first time we've done this and we have no idea if it's working properly. Let's see.
Oh, yay. We got a few folks here.
Excellent.
Awesome. And Recon. All right, good. And Cheryl, yes, awesome. All right.
All right, Luke, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, 3-on-3. Hey, so welcome to everybody who is joining us either here or after the fact when we post the recording. As was stated in the post on Reddit, this is not a sales pitch for DeskCert. We love what we do. We love who we are, but we are really here to serve the community. And we want to keep this as objective and neutral as possible. We want to answer your questions about CISSP, wherever those might take us. That's what we're going to focus on. And we've got the questions up, and we'll start going through those in a minute. But just to kind of give some context here, my name is Lou Hablas, and I'm based in Alpharetta, Georgia. I've been in the IT industry for going on 29 years probably at this point. Been very fortunate to work with Rob and John for the last 5 years. And I'm one of the moderators in the subreddit, but again, I'm objective there, hopefully as much as possible as well, because again, I want to serve the community. And John and Rob, they're really the guys that know so much about this exam, especially John. John has been involved with CISSP going all the way back to, I think, the early 1800s, John? No, just kidding. 1999, when he took and passed the exam. And then he had the good fortune to actually work directly with ISC2 as a co-author of their first guidebook that was published in December of 2003. He sat on the exam committee. I'll let him share a bit more about himself in just a moment. And then Rob also, he and John were fortuitous to meet when they were both working at Deloitte. They became Deloitte's global trainers. And, Rob is an absolute mastermind creatively, as everybody has seen in all of the material that we have in the mind maps and in the other sources that we have available. Very creative. And so I'll let those guys explain a little bit more about themselves, and then we'll dive into the questions.
You want to go first, John?
Yeah, John, go ahead.
Thank you, Lou. That's a great introduction, and welcome, everyone. I'm John, and as Lou said, been involved with ISC2 for many, many years. In fact, almost from the beginning when they started the CISSP certification, which by now is over 30 years. And over the years, I've helped them do a lot of things, not only create the exam outlines for the CISSP, but as Lou mentioned, been part of the exam committee, which oversees obviously the questions that make it into the exam bank, and help them really in many of their capacities, including a lot of their committees. Lou also mentioned the exam committee, but also the CBK committee. And both Rob and I actually were involved in launching one of their newest certifications, which is the CCSP. But they also asked me to write the very first book, as Lou mentioned, back in 2003, which seems like ages ago. But really familiar with the process of the exam questions and how they make it into the exam bank as scored items. And that's what we're here to help you with, is maybe helping you understand that process so that you can better prepare. But I'll pass it over to Rob at this point.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'll keep this very brief because we want to be here to answer your questions. So I've had the great pleasure of working in security for over 20 years now and teaching CISSP with John. That was how I got into this, was teaching classes with John. And he and I have taught classes all over the world now for major corporate clients for, 15 plus years. And I just love doing it. I love teaching. I love helping folks like yourself learn, become better security professionals. And so, any questions you have about the material that you might see, the stuff that you need to know topic wise, questions about exam strategies, study strategies, anything like that. We're happy to answer anything. And so that's why we're here. All right, Lou, do you want to?
And just let me add real quickly, which email do we want folks, if you have specific questions about us, we prefer that you just email it to us. Let's not talk about that in this chat. So Rob, which would be the best email?
Send to me if you want. Yeah, why don't we do that? I'll write it up here, rob@destert.com if you have any questions. Yeah, but yeah, let's do that.
Yep, rob@destert.com. Yeah. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. So first, thanks to everybody that replied to our post in Reddit. We've got some good questions here, and we're just going to start going down them in order. And we should be able to get through all of them. So the first question from S. Ova Ara. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I know it's important to understand the concepts and not just memorize them. But is there anything that should definitely be memorized to a T? And I think, John, were you going to take that one?
I think this is Rob's question, is it not, Rob?
Yeah, Rob.
Why don't you take the first little part, right, John? Because you've been so deeply involved in how the exam was designed and the questions were designed. You can cover the first part about it is way more important to cover concepts, and then I can cover a few of the specific things people have to memorize.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important for people to understand that this exam is not a memorization exam, although there are certain things that people, tend to understand they need to memorize, and Rob will talk more about that. But this exam was created really to measure competence rather than, for example, having knowledge and memorizing certain things. And that's why, you can't just read a book, for example, or study for a few months on doing practice exam questions and be able to pass this. The way the exam is structured is that it really requires you to understand the concepts and apply those concepts in the best way possible. That's what those exam questions are meant to measure. And that's why when you look at these real exam questions, you'll see that in the answers, there'll be true statements, right? There'll be true statements that look really good to you based on, for example, your experience, your skills, what you've been working with, and so on. And the exam requires you to pick the best answer based and focused on really what security needs to be focused on, and that is to align with goals and objectives of the organization. And this is why we talk about how having that CEO mindset and perspective is really important, but having also the foundation of potentially very technical knowledge that a security professional should have in order to be competent. So all of the questions are focused on that. Unfortunately, there are certain things that obviously we need to memorize. And, that includes certain things that Rob's going to talk to you about now.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Because there are, as John mentioned, right? Primarily what you have to focus on is just understanding concepts and how to best apply those in certain scenarios. But there are a few things that you do need to memorize. And so, let me list off some of those. So the RMF, the Risk Management Framework, this is a 7-step process. You really need to know that. You really need to know about SOC reports, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, and the different types, type 1, type 2. You need to know about those. Within networking, there's a bit of the OSI model you have to remember, right? You have to remember the 7 layers. You have to remember the key protocols and the key devices at each layer. What's a router? Is it a layer 2 or 3 device, etc. You definitely need to know some of the common ports for things like HTTP, FTP, things like that. You need to know the basic IP address ranges, or specifically what are the private IP address ranges. So the 192.168, 10.0, etc. You need to know what the network classes, class A, class B, class C, and the number of devices that are possible in each class. What else? The EAL levels. So you need to know about common criteria. And within common criteria, there's the 7 EAL levels. It's important to remember those. That's a great example of what could be a drag and drop question. You'd be asked to put the EAL levels in order, right? So EAL 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you have to know that functionally is better than structurally. You need to know the levels and the order they go in. Within domain 3, you need to know a little, some memorization is required around cryptography. The major algorithms like AES, DES, RC4, a few others. What are the major key links of these? Some basics like that. And related to physical security, that we know there's some memorization required around different types of fire extinguishers, for instance, class A, B, C, D, and K. Within domain 8, the SDLC, the software development lifecycle, you need to know the major phases there and the difference between SDLC and SLC, the software, the system lifecycle. So memorizing the difference there, and where to, oh, I'm forgetting here, John. You teach this part. The from EAL.
Certification and accreditation.
Certification exactly versus accreditation. Certification is part of testing. Accreditation is part of deployment. That's the thing you have to memorize. Another big one, IPsec. So the different modes that IPsec can be run in, and how it can be run in the mode that provides encryption, the mode that doesn't, and then the different tunnel versus transport. So doing some memorizing this in there. So sorry, that's just a bit of a laundry list, but if you go through that is some of the absolute key things that you just need to straight up memorize. Thankfully, it's not a giant list, but those are definitely some of them.
I would add incident response to that as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the incident response process. We know there's lots of questions on that. Yeah, that's good. That's a question. And actually, you know what? I'll add one more. Super important to understand the difference between different privilege ways of approving a user's access to a system, different privilege levels. This is the differences between mandatory access control, discretionary access control, and non-discretionary access control. And then within that, rule versus role-based versus attribute or context-based access control. There's a ton of questions around that. So making sure you're super clear in your mind as to the differences between discretionary, non-discretionary, mandatory, and then some of those subtypes, rule, role, attribute, etc. Those are super important to memorize.
And of course, if I could just add a couple more there too, like the change management life cycle, for example, change control that companies obviously have in place, that security should be involved right from the start and throughout each of the phases. And of course, probably what a lot of us are familiar with, but the data life cycle, and how security needs to be involved right from the start in the create phase all the way to the archiving and destruction phase, and some of the things that security would provide as part of those phases and how security deals with those.
Yeah, and let me just give you an example, right? Like when I'm saying you need to memorize the types of fire extinguishers, like this is what you essentially need to memorize, right? The different classes, A, B, C, D, and K, and you need to understand what type of fires are they meant to put out. And this is where, and as I'm sure all of you know, mnemonics are super helpful, right? So to help you remember that a Class A fire extinguisher is designed to put out common combustibles, maybe you can remember that A stands for ash, right? Class B fire extinguishers are meant to put out combustible liquids. Liquids boil, so B for boil, etc. So this is, when we're talking about memorization, this is what you essentially have to do, right? For the things that we've listed there, like the RMF, like the cyber kill chain's another one. For these, make sure you understand the exact steps. And like, let me even bring up I think I have the RMF one here as well.
And we've got a bunch of questions that we need to answer too.
All right, okay, let's move on from there then. Yeah, that's what you need to memorize, is that sort of level to know, like and let me just add one more tiny piece. When you're memorizing something like the RMF, it's super important to remember the order of the steps, the exact name of the step, and at a high level, what's happening, during the difference between categorize versus assess and so forth. So it's important with these things you need to memorize, the order of things is very important, and the names of each thing at each level, at each step. That's the sort of thing you need to memorize. And that's where mnemonics can be so helpful. Okay, sorry, Lou, what's the next question? You can keep us on track here.
Yeah, and I know there are a couple of related questions in chat, and we will circle back to those. But yeah, let's go ahead and let's see. Smeagol 1986 is asking, between school and work, I have access to Precipio and Udemy. How effective would you rate their materials for studying for CISSP specifically? So, real quickly, we're not going to rate, one resource or another and say this is the best or this is not. There are a lot of good resources out there. And, I kind of liken it to like CISSP is a big loaf of bread, and there are all kinds of different knives in the drawer that you can use to slice that bread. And if you can find the resource that resonates with you, that covers the exam outline, that is published by ISC2, and will then allow you to do what Rob was just talking about and what John was talking about, focusing on learning and understanding concepts and being able to apply that understanding, then really there are a number of resources that are out there that you can use. You don't need to use a multitude, because the other thing that I often mention to students that I work with is it's a quality approach versus a quantity approach. And if you pay any attention to the posts in the subreddit, you can see every day that there are a lot of different ways that people have prepared for and then successfully navigated this exam. And that could include the OSG or AIO or one of the Udemy courses or Precipio. I've seen that name mentioned in a lot of different successful contexts. And so there are a lot of resources out there, but I would recommend maybe choosing one or two and really leveraging those as your primary resource, and then weaving some practice questions around that, weaving say Pete Zerger's exam cram video or our mind map videos, which are really good high level summary videos, and then getting some exposure to the terminology, because there is a lexicon associated with CISSP that people need to be familiar with, because the more familiar you are with the language and the terminology, of course, that's going to translate to more efficiency and effectiveness when you're answering the questions. And so, again, you can weave those things together. You don't need, everything in the kitchen sink. Again, quality over quantity approach, and you can navigate and crack this exam.
Yeah, and I don't like to plug things, but I will plug this here because it's free. Our app, the flashcards in particular, because most people just totally ignore them. They think, oh, flashcards, that's boring. You don't need to learn that. But I mean, we teach live classes every week. We train thousands of people every year. And the surprising bit of feedback we get constantly is that the flashcards are incredibly helpful, because they help you learn the security terminology that you need to know. And then that way, when you read a real exam question, you'll be able to pick out the keywords. You'll be able to understand quickly what they mean, and you'll be able to answer the question so much more easily. So I'll point out our app. It's free. And a lot of people just ignore the flashcards because they're like, flashcards are boring. But go through them, actually. That's an amazing free resource that you're more than welcome to, right? So yeah, that's a great way to learn.
Yeah.
All right. What's the next one we want to cover?
So this question, I think John's going to take, and this was posted by cynical_dad-gamer. While CISSP is in high regard on the international job market, it's so focused on U.S. agencies, laws, and regulations, while only briefly going over NIS2 or GDPR. Will there eventually be a CISSP with EU focus and one with US focus? As I'm prepping, I can't help but think, wow, these US things mean nothing to me here in the EU in terms of added value, unless I'm working for a multinational with offices in the US. I would even go so far as to have a CISSP tailored to each major region, EU, US, Asia, etc. I believe this will put it in a higher regard with each respective region. One thing I just want to touch on real quickly. NIS2 is very new, and it is not part of this exam. The exam refreshes every 3 years. And so perhaps in a next iteration of the CISSP exam, ISC2 will deem it, worth including. And that typically the exam outline for a given refresh is worked on months in advance. And typically they'll announce the exam, they'll publish the new exam outline about 5 to 6 months prior to the refresh. The last refresh took place in April of 2024. The next one will likely happen in 2027. So don't worry about NIS2. That, again, is very, very new, not likely to show up. But now, John, can you answer the rest of that question, please?
Yeah, I mean, the exam, they take special care in making sure that this exam is global in nature. And so they don't require, for example, anyone in Europe to be able to understand certain standards and frameworks that are only applicable in the US, for example, or vice versa. And a good example of that is privacy laws. They don't ask you to know specifics about privacy laws in different areas of the world. However, having said that, they do have questions in the exam bank that focus on, for example, privacy laws and legislation and NIST standards that are used globally. So, for example, GDPR is something that has far-reaching implications to the entire world from a privacy perspective. And so that is something that is definitely addressed on the exam. NIST specifications, Rob mentioned the RMF earlier, for example. some of the standards that are issued by NIST, even though they are a US organization, these things are used across the globe as the basis for providing comprehensive guidance for security, for example. So if anything has made it into the common body of knowledge of security as being something that's useful, whether it's a framework or a privacy law or something like that, then it's going to be reflected in the exam because it's something that the entire world finds useful and is actually using. And I know that from an exam perspective, the exam committee at ISC2 takes great care in making sure that any questions address only things that are global in interest as far as the exam is concerned.
Yeah, great response, John, and thanks. And the other thing too, and I did reply to you in the Reddit to your question, Cynical Dad Gamer. As you get further along in your studies, you'll realize that the laws and regulations and things that you're encountering right now, they're a pretty minimal part of the overall body of knowledge that you need to be familiar with for the sake of the exam. So don't get overwhelmed by that, thinking, wow, this is so US centric. It's really not.
No, there's only a small handful of there was a question about like what NIST standards and stuff. There's really only two, right? Like there's 800-53, the cybersecurity control framework, and 800-34, the RMF. That's really the only two you need to know about. And you don't even need to really memorize the number, right? The exam is not about memorization for the most part. So you're not going to see a ton of questions saying, like, well, which exact standard does this obscure thing? You don't have to memorize the names and numbers of hundreds of different standards by any stretch. Just a small handful that you'll see in every CISSP guidebook. Things like ISO 27001 and NIST 800-53 and 37, etc.
Yep. And you kind of backing up a little bit to what John and Rob were talking about earlier. One of the things that I try and impress upon students, that even though there is potentially technical things that you'll see on this exam, they really need to be perceived and understood from a security perspective, because ultimately this is a security exam, and everybody prepping for this exam is a security professional. And so you really want to understand the security relevance of those technical things above all else. And then as we often do mention to students that we work with as well, there's often a value proposition associated with these things. And value is not just money. It could be performance. It could be complexity. It could be time. And as a leader in the organization, knowing you've got limited resources to work with, you need to be making wise decisions that are helping the organization achieve goals and objectives efficiently. So you've got to have an eye on the value. And so that's something to pay attention to as well. All right, another question for you, John. And this is a good question. Why? This is from adorable-hedgehog814. Why is the test score not provided? And why isn't a domain level breakdown included when you pass? This doesn't just apply to ISC2, maybe more so with technical certs, but I'd like to know what I got wrong so I don't continue on with my career with the wrong knowledge. If I still have deficiencies, I'd like to improve those areas. And that's a good second point there. But John, take it away.
Yeah, that's an easy question to answer. ISC2 used to provide scores, but then they got pushback from the industry. They didn't want individuals that passed the exam, for example, to be compared by different companies. Someone scored 97 or 970, for example, or someone scored, 701. They don't want anyone to be compared based on the score of them achieving really what is competence or being recognized as competent in security, which is really what this certification is focused on. So whether you score 700 or whether you score 999 on this exam doesn't really matter. Based on the psychometrics that ISC2 uses, you've met the minimum requirements for becoming a CISSP. And that's all they need you to tell you, for example, because they don't want you to be compared with others or have the industry be able to compare you with others. So as long as you pass, it doesn't matter what your score is. Now, if you...
701.
Oh, sorry, Rob. They don't want what?
I'm joking. I'm like 701. That was me. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But, if you fail, however, they will order the domains for you so that you know what to focus on your next attempt, which is good. And, one of the things that we often forget about this exam is that, and this certification, is that it really focuses it makes you focus on certain areas that you may not be, too competent in or have knowledge in. So the whole purpose of this is not just to recognize people as being competent, but to also improve the entire industry, because people that want to pass the CISSP exam need to study areas they're typically they're not too familiar with. So overall, it makes you study all of these things that relate to security, which ultimately makes you a better security professional.
Hey Lou, can I quickly knock off a couple of questions that are in the chat here on YouTube, because I want to make sure we're answering those people too.
No, that would be great, because I'm checking the Reddit.
Someone asked, do you need to memorize the key sizes? And yeah, you do. You need to memorize a few cryptography key sizes. Let me make my screen full screen here so you can see these better. So to specifically answer your question, yes, you do have to memorize some keys. Oh, hang on, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. New with the StreamYard thing. There we go. Yeah, these are the specific key lengths you need to remember. You need to remember that DES uses a 56-bit key and that it uses a 64-bit block size. You need to remember that IDEA uses a 128-bit key. Triple DES, although it has a true key length of 168 bits, the effective key length is only 112. You need to understand that. And you need to remember that AES, one of the cool things about AES is it's adjustable. You can have different key lengths, so 128, 192, or 256. So that, at a minimum, is what you need to memorize for key links. So there you go. Hopefully that answered your question. All right.
You want to take another question there, Rob? You got any?
Yeah, sure. What are the best points to remember for domain 4? Ooh, I don't know. What's another?
That would take an hour or two.
Yeah, that's going to take an hour and a half. John takes about 5 hours to teach domain 4. So yeah, why don't I just cover a few quick ones, right? So like I said, you do need to know the OSI model. So there we go. Hang on here. I've got the wrong thing open. Yeah, so you do need to know, as I said earlier, some of the basics of the OSI model. So you need to know, what are the 7 layers? You need to know, as I mentioned, what are the major devices at each layer and what are the major protocols at each layer. So that is some required memorization, some of that key information. You need to remember some of the authentication protocols and how they work, CHAP, EAP, PEEP, the differences between those. You definitely need to know about some of the types of EAP. We know there's questions about this, about the differences between EAP TLS or EAP MD5 and how it doesn't use any server authentication, for instance, right? Super concerning. So you need to do some memorization around EAP. This is what I mentioned about the private IP addresses. You need to know about these. You need to know about the network classes. So class A, class B, class C, and how many devices are in each of them, and some of the common ports. So that's some of the key bits that you truly need to memorize from domain 4. Sorry, I'm blasting through that, and I would normally we host AMA calls every week internally, and I would spend a lot more time on that, but I just want to make sure we have a chance to go through everyone's questions here. So I just kind of
hey Rob, there's actually a really good question that somebody asked. Hello World asked, can I pass and study in 2 months? And the answer to that is definitely yes, absolutely. And in fact, I think we a lot of people that study for months and months and months and months are actually probably working against being successful. And if you can focus on the right things, and that is aligning with the exam outline, study those things, you can definitely do it in 2 months.
Yep. Completely.
I mean, it's worth mentioning, John, we teach boot camps every single week, and we have tons of people go through our boot camps where they'll start studying with us on a Monday, and then we tell them to take the exam within a week or two. Lots of people take the exam on Saturday. I mean, we've had literally hundreds of people pass within a week, or just over. You have to absolutely focus and study for like 12 to 16 hours a day, but it is possible to do in that amount of time. So 2 months.
Not hundreds, Rob, not hundreds, but thousands. If you take the many years that we've been doing this.
That's true. Yeah. So the simple answer is 2 months, absolutely achievable, but it's all about the real question is, how many hours per day can you devote to this? And can you really have focused study time? Because to really pass this exam, you need to be studying for at minimum 100 to 200 hours at least. Depends, of course, on your background and stuff, but in that range. And so if you think about that, 100 to 200 hours plus, and you divide that up, that's totally achievable within 2 months.
And hello world, will you send your question about access to full content if I pay monthly or every month?
Yeah.
Send that to me at lou@deskcert.com and I'll get back to you on that. Okay. And then Rob, do you want to take Tanya Rajwa, James Manoika's question about audit capability?
About audit capability?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm trying to read. When assessing the audit capability, my eyes are bad and the screen's a long way away here. So when assessing the audit capability of an application, which of the following activities is most important? Identifying procedures to investigate suspicious activity, determine if audit records can, and the rest is cut off. Well, I mean, and actually John could probably answer this better. John's way better at exam strategy. But the first thing I would say, this is obviously a question that's come from somewhere. The first thing you have to do when you're reading a question is you have to pick out the keywords here, right? So when assessing the capability of an application is most important. I mean, a key thing there, right, is you're assessing the capabilities of an application, right? So you're looking to be able to figure out what is this application meant to be used for, who's supposed to be having access to it, what would be this is a security exam, so what would be the security implications therein?
Actually, Rob, I can add a little bit to that because, we teach that strategy of how to read questions, right? And the answer here has to be assessing the audit capabilities of an application. So that just based on that, you can eliminate answer A, for example, because it says identify procedures to investigate suspicious activity. That is not what audit capability would be focused on. So you can eliminate that right off the bat. Now, as Rob said, I can only see part of answer B here, and I don't see C or D, so I can't really comment on the other ones. But there will always be keywords in the question that if you're able to pick out these keywords, it will always point you to the correct answer in the list and allow you to eliminate the other three answers. Real exam questions that have gone through the process that ISC2 puts every single question through will contain those keywords. Like I said, you'll be able to pick out what those keywords are, and those keywords will always point you to the correct answer in the list. If you do that strategy properly, of course.
If you look in chat, John, it looks like the rest of the answers were posted.
Yeah, and while you're reading that, John, I will add this piece. This is a critical thing to watch out for, right? This is the CISSP is a management level certification. This is not a technical exam. So another just overall exam strategy you can always use is never look for the technical answer. The technical answer is almost always going to be wrong. You always want to look for an answer that says something about policy or high level things like that. The technical answer is almost never correct on this exam because it's not a technical exam. This is a management level certification. So.
And I was just going to add while John is looking at that question, that exam questions are written very well. As John alluded to, they go through a very rigorous process to create questions. They're written by teams of people, and there's oversight from third parties that also evaluate the exam creation, question creation process. And importantly, for folks that may not be aware, every candidate sitting for the exam will see 25 unscored questions on the first 100 questions that they encounter. And those questions are in there because ISC2 is trying to determine, are they worthy of becoming scored questions? And they're looking for certain criteria to make that determination. If you spend any time on ISC2's website, one thing you'll learn is all of the questions, whether they're a hard question, an easy question, or an in-between question, they have a 50-50 chance of being answered correctly or incorrectly. And that's how the CAT can efficiently walk a candidate through the exam. And so again, exam questions are written very well. If you understand the concepts and topics, you'll know what's being asked. And from that management level perspective that Rob just talked about, you should be able to work your way to the best answer.
Yeah, I'd have to study this question and where it came from as well. But, obviously the key words are, determine if audit records, answer B says, determine if audit records contain sufficient information. You're auditing an application from an audit perspective, and that's probably going to be the correct answer. The other ones really focus on the ability to react after some sort of incident has happened, for example. So it really depends. And what you really need to focus on is how does this help the organization, right? So security is looking at the audit capability of an application in order to ultimately allow goals and objectives to be achieved. In this case, to be able to obviously provide enough audit information to be able to protect the organization from a risk perspective.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say here, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lou.
I was just going to say, and one thing I would say to the point I just made about exam questions being written very well, sometimes, or maybe even oftentimes, depending on the question bank, some of the practice questions out there are not written very well. They force students to make assumptions. You know, we don't necessarily understand the intent of the question writer, so it's hard for us to kind of put ourselves in their place and help, you know, explain the best answer. And so, you know, take some of the practice questions that you see with a bit of a grain of salt, and more than anything, understand the big picture concept related to the question, because that's ultimately what's going to get you up on the podium.
I'd like to spend just a second on this, because this comes up all the time, of course, right? Like, where are the best practice questions? And I think this is worth understanding. Real exam questions go through, frankly, a ridiculous process to end up on the exam. It takes months, an enormous amount of work for even a single question to end up on the exam. It's written by an expert, goes through a committee, it's torn apart, rewritten, goes through psychometrics to make sure it's structured correctly. Then it shows up on the exam as a beta question just to gather statistics. Based on those statistics, it might be just dropped or refined, and then it might be a beta question again. I mean, it literally takes an enormous amount of time to make a single question. No one that's writing practice questions has that sort of time on their hands. When you see a question bank with 1,000 questions on it, guaranteed that person hasn't spent 20, 30 hours on every single one of those questions. And so this is why, and I know it's super frustrating for everyone, right? But it's why, and you'll see this everywhere on the internet. When people go to take the real exam, they're like, oh, the questions were so different than all the practice questions I've seen out there. Yeah, because no one has the time or the ability to go through that for practice questions out there. So just the grain of salt, or the warning I would give everyone is, you know, I get it. I love practice questions as well to prepare for an exam, but just recognize that the vast majority of practice questions that you see out there are not representative of real exam questions. They're just not the same. They're not written in the same way. They're not of the same quality.
And Rob, if I can just add one more thing to that, because it really takes ISC2 months and months and months of statistics that they gather on one question, for example, before they can determine whether that question needs to be rewritten, the answers changed, or whatever to make it a real good question. So even you're absolutely right. Each question goes through a incredibly long period of time before they actually make it into as a test question. But then they have to gather relevant information based on how hundreds of people answer that particular question before it actually makes it into the exam bank as a scored item. No one has that capability to gather all of these statistics, for example, for each of the questions in order to make sure that ultimately that question measures your competence rather than just knowledge.
Yeah. So that's why when you take practice questions, expect that they're not going to look exactly like real exam questions. They're not going to. But so you can still do practice questions to help you learn and memorize facts and stuff, but don't expect them to, like, when you go to take the real exam, expect to be surprised, and the real exam questions are going to be different just because they go through such a rigorous process to end up on the real exam.
Yeah, and having said that, maybe Rob, it's good that there are better sets of questions out there than others, for example. And a lot of people like quantum exams, for example.
Let's just call it out. Like, as a perfect example, the official exam questions, are they good in the official book? No, they're not really.
We're going to get in trouble now if ISC2 is watching this.
No, sorry, that's not true. No, they are. Yeah, they're not bad. But the point is this: there are no questions out there that perfectly mimic real exam questions. That's the fair thing to say.
Yeah.
Which is what makes honestly part of what makes the certification so valuable, because you cannot just memorize a bunch of stuff and go and take this exam. You need to understand this stuff. You need to really spend the time to understand the concepts to be able to apply that knowledge properly on the exam. So yeah. There we go. That's probably enough to say about that.
Yeah, let's get back to some of the questions that were posted on Reddit. I'll read this next one off, and then you guys can dive in and we can all dive in on this one. Jabbrwk. I'm early on in my study and have been using the Death Cert book as my primary resource, but also have an O'Reilly subscription, so using some of the material on there. The level of depth between courses seems to vary quite a bit. For example, the logical architecture of the zero trust model isn't mentioned at all in Death Cert that I can see, while it is included in Last Mile and covered in detail in Sorry Green's course. Is it that some materials give additional context, or maybe that the material pops up in different places in different resources, so they'll all get there in the end? Or is it that some are making decisions to trade off depth versus likelihood of a question asking about that particular cranny of the domain? Good question.
Yeah.
So
do you want me to start with this one?
Yeah, go ahead and dive in.
Yeah, maybe all of you can add to this, Rob and Lou, but first of all, our book, for example, is completely aligned with the exam outline. It's the exam outline that really drives the questions that make it into the exam bank that people see when they sit for the real exam. All right. And so, something like zero trust is only mentioned very lightly in the exam outline. Therefore, the questions that you're going to see on the real exam are not going to deal with that in detail. And so there's no need to, for example, read about something like that in a lot of detail, because that's not the focus of what the exam questions are going to look for, right? So we want it to be different with our book, so that we would focus exactly on what the exam outline addresses and to that level. That's why we called it the concise guide. All right, Rob, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. I mean, the CISSP exam is famous for being a mile wide and an inch deep. And it's also famous that there are no big exam dumps out there of exactly what's on it, right? There's thousands of questions in the official exam bank. You can get questions that cover an incredibly broad number of topics. So it is frankly impossible to write any book that's going to cover every single thing that you would see on the exam. And this is why you see that out there. And the thing I would say as well is that, and this is actually an important bit of advice I think I can give everyone, that you need to be prepared for. When you go and take the exam, no matter how much you've studied from any source, the official CBK, doesn't matter, any source, you are going to see questions on the exam on stuff that you've just never heard of before, because there are so many questions on so many different possible topics. And some of those questions have been on there for years. So fully expect that you will be surprised by some questions. You'll be like, I have no idea what this is asking. I've never even heard of this before. It's going to happen to you on the exam. So being prepared for that is important, to have sort of the mental toughness to say, okay, yeah, I knew this was going to happen, and I'm not going to let it throw me off and freak me out. Because if you get off your game, then you're pretty much doomed on the exam, right? You have to be confident that you are going to pass this exam. And it's not impossible. Even if you get a question on something that you've never even heard of before, if you use the right techniques, right? If you keep that management CEO mindset and think about what I'm ultimately always trying to do is help the business achieve its goals and objectives, solve problems, right? And if you look for the answer that always has, always look for policy, right? Look for the more all-encompassing answer. If you apply these techniques, you can often get down to at least a 50% chance. You can eliminate at least a couple of answers, and often you even get to the right answer. So I guess the broad answer I'm trying to give you here is that you're always going to see stuff on the exam you've never heard of, but you can still absolutely pass the exam by having a good foundation of knowledge and applying the right techniques to how you answer questions and really thinking, having the right mindset.
Yep. I've got nothing to add to that. Let me take this one question in the chat from Drummersaurus. I answered the final 50 questions in 30 minutes the last time I took the exam. What are your tips on time management? And that's something that I often talk with students about. And knowing the exam can run from question 100 to 150 or anywhere in between. My advice to anybody preparing for this exam and when they go and take the exam is to be prepared for 150 questions and to be there for the entire 3 hours. We all want it and hope that it's going to end at 100 or soon after, but there's no guarantee. And if it doesn't end at 100, that's not a big deal. As long as you're seeing questions, you're on the playing field, you're in the game. And the only thing that needs to happen is the cat just needs a bit more time to determine your competence and your proficiency. So with 150 in 3 hours, I generally recommend that students should practice and try and be prepared to answer about 25 questions every 30 minutes or 50 questions every 60 minutes. That will allow you to maintain a proactive posture while you're taking the exam, so you can maintain, charge over the process. When you find yourself at question 100 and, oh no, I've burned 2.5 of my 3 hours, now you're in reactive mode and you can't think as clearly and as efficiently. And of course, you're not going to think as effectively. So a bit of practice, and this is where some of the question banks can come in handy just from a time management standpoint. And just be prepared. And again, I'll go back to something that was really important to me, understanding the terminology, because the more efficiently you understand the terminology, you're going to be able to navigate the questions equally efficiently and then answer them. And so if you understand what's being asked, you're not going to have to try and put pieces of context together to figure out what the question is in fact asking you. So, a little bit of practice, you're stretching those muscles and you'll build them.
And I would add something here. Because someone posted, you have 74 seconds per questions, and technically, yes, that is correct.
72.
Yeah, 72. But I would absolutely, because you pointed out something really important, Lou, that I want to emphasize. You said check in at about 25 questions or check in at about 50 questions. Do not be checking every single question, because some questions you'll be able to answer right away. Other questions, you're going to take 2, 3, 4 minutes on a question. So it's about averages, right? So at around 25 minutes, this is roughly where you should be. At around 60 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, this is where you should be. Look at that scale. Absolutely do not look at every single question and freak yourself out and be like, this question took me 4 minutes or something like that. Just check in periodically and I need to maybe speed up a little bit or slow down a little bit, but fully expect there's a lot of variability in how long certain questions take. And because there was a question earlier in the chat as well about, someone asked about scenario-based questions where you get like a whole wall of text. You may, not always, right? But you may encounter those. Some people see none. Some people see like 4 or 5 of those. So you have to be prepared for those. And the best way to answer those is be very focused. When you're reading a scenario, think very carefully about key bits of information, right? Like be reading through it and just applying the best filter that you can to think about what are the really critical bits of information here. And then when you get down to the actual question, and John, you can speak to this way better than I can, but like you really need to read the question multiple times to really understand what the question is asking you. And that'll help you then understand what are the key bits of information from this. Because most of what they give you is extraneous, useless information, and you can ignore most of it. So you've got to be able to pick out the key parts. And John, do you want to speak more to that aspect? You're so good at that.
Yeah, no, they do that by design, because again, I'll mention that this exam was structured to measure competence rather than just knowledge. So you're absolutely right. The question itself will put you in a scenario, for example, give you more information than you actually need. And if you're able to pick out what the keywords are, that's all you really need as a competent security professional, and having in the back of your mind what security is focused on, which is to align and contribute towards goals and objectives of the organization itself, right? Even though the question may look very technical, for example, in many cases, all of that technical knowledge that you have, needs to be focused on what's important to the organization and what security has evolved to be today. Probably the most important, function in the organization that's there to support and align and contribute towards goals and objectives. How does that technical control ultimately do that? What's the benefit that it provides to the organization, for example, is what you need to focus on. And then those questions become very easy, right? Because you, as Rob said, you can eliminate all of that noise that exists in the question so that you can focus on those right things as being someone that's really aligning with goals and objectives of the organization.
Can I answer another question in the chat here? Someone asked, Gav asked, where did you post about this? We posted about this on Reddit and LinkedIn. And this is the very first time we've ever done this. And we're hoping it's valuable for folks, but we're not sure. If it is, I think we'd be open to doing this more. So maybe that's a question for everyone that's listening in here. It looks like we have 32 people. Is this helpful? Is this useful? It'd be really helpful for us to know that. If it is, I think we're open to doing this more. but we want to make sure it's useful. So if you're finding it helpful, let us know in the comments, and we can schedule more of these. And where you would find that information, I think we'll post on our LinkedIn, we'll post on our CISSP Reddit, I think if that's a good place for us to post.
Yeah. I mean, well, and we are recording this, so the recording will be available. And but again, just to reiterate, even though we all represent DeskCert, we are here representing CISSP, and we really want to support the community.
Despite the hoodies.
What's that? Yeah,
Despite
I know.
the hoodie.
We want to help people neutrally, because again, as I said earlier, there are a lot of bread knives in the drawer that can slice this loaf of bread called CISSP. We're not the only one. We're one. And to reiterate what I said earlier, a quality approach over a quantity approach. Find the resources that resonate with you. Generally one book, or maybe a book and then a supporting book and maybe a video course or whatever, and then some supporting resources around that, and dive in and commit and focus on the resources that do represent the exam outline, because that's what ultimately the questions are based upon. The questions for some people, they think that they come from the official study guide. That's not true, because even the official study guide is written against the exam outline. The official study guide is official in name, but again, the authors of that book do not write the exam questions. As John already pointed out, they're written by teams of people. They go through a very, very rigorous vetting process before they even make it into the pool as a test question. So again, there are a lot of reputable resources out there that people can use, and we're one of them.
Eric is taking the exam on the first week of December. Eric, all the very best in your exam. Let us know when you pass. You're going to rock it.
Yeah.
Naz has a good question. Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to recommend the mind maps, but go on.
Well, I was just going to say, as Lou just mentioned, this industry has been really good to us. And so we want to give back. That's why we're doing this. But it's also why we make a lot of our materials freely available. And Lou just mentioned the mind maps, for example, that you can find on YouTube. Our app is totally free with, I don't know how many questions, that sample exam questions and flashcards. Rob, you can speak better to that. There's a whole bunch of other things too, domain summaries that we make available for free. And of course, you can buy our book and other books to supplement that, and always use the exam outline as the basis of what you need to study, as the outline for what you need to study, for example. But we make a lot of free things available that I think a lot of people have found very useful and been able to pass without taking our course. So we're not here to push our course. We're here to give back to the industry. And there's a lot of free stuff that we give out that you can use.
Hey, Lou, I mean, you spend a lot more time on Reddit. You see what other people are finding very helpful. But like, I think the Pete Zerger video, that's free and really
Pete Zerger's exam cram is excellent. And
Kelly's Why You Will Pass the CISSP video is very popular as well.
Yeah, Kelly Handerhan, her Why You Will Pass. And I will reiterate, quantum exam questions I think are good, and you see them mentioned again and again in a very positive way. There are a lot of resources out there. You don't need to spend oodles of money. You don't need to go and pay premium prices for things. I know ISC2 has a course, a paid course, and I think O'Reilly and LinkedIn Learning. There's some other resources out there that people can utilize. Find the one that resonates and represents the exam outline, and then focus on the other things that we've been talking about. You'll be in good shape.
Yeah, and you can absolutely self-study for this, right? Without having to spend a bunch of money. Usually the reason people tend to spend money for like a boot camp or something is just to accelerate it, right? Like that's what we see, right? People that don't have a ton of time and they've got frankly more money than time, then it makes sense to pay for a boot camp or something.
And if their company is paying for it, Rob.
Yeah, if the company's paying for it, but you can absolutely, I self-studied. You can absolutely self-study for this exam. It's just going to take more time, right? Because you're going to have to cobble together the materials, and you're going to see some overlap and some conflicting things, and you'll have to work through that. But it's also a good learning experience. So, it's absolutely, there's so many free resources out there. You can absolutely self-study for free, no problem. And Mike says you were saying you listen to the mind maps in the car ride every day to work. I can only apologize that you have to listen to me every day. So sorry about that. That's not fun.
And Nasser, to your point about English not being your first language, first of all, look at that as an opportunity. Okay, it's not an obstacle. I've worked with numerous students who speak English as their second or even third language, and so it's far from their first. One thing I would recommend there, again, I've already said it multiple times, focus on terminology, understand the terms, understand the alternative meanings of words and terms that you're encountering. So when you see those on the exam, you'll know exactly what's being conveyed. But you can definitely do this. Again, I've worked with numerous students who have successfully navigated this exam, and English is far from their first language. So believe in yourself and put your mind to it, and you can do it.
It's also worth noting that the exam is available in some other languages. It's not a lot, but it's a few. And if you take the exam in another language, you'll get, like, say, German or Spanish or something. You'll see questions in both that language, German, and also in English. You'll see both.
Yeah, that's a great
that's
point.
worth mentioning as well. Some people find that helpful.
Yep.
Yeah. You're getting your Canadian accent down. Oh, very good, Mike. Yeah. Welcome to Canada, eh? Yeah, sorry, we're Canadian. John and I are Canadian. Lou has to put up with us in our ridiculous accents. So,
well, they got to put up with me too. You know, I'm coming down here in the South. I don't talk real Southern, but I can.
That's good. Mike says if he passes, can he get one of your hoodies there, Rob?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't. We gotta figure that out. Yeah, I think we have a merch store, but I don't know actually where to access it. So it's not something we just printed these for ourselves because we like, I don't know, I like wearing them, but not am I allowed a dictionary? So no, you are not. You're not allowed to take.
Not a dictionary. There is a built-in glossary. So if you want to look up an acronym, you can, but all acronyms are spelled out. So if you see SMTP on the exam in parentheses, it's going to say Simple Mail Transport Protocol. They spell everything out. But yeah, you're going to have to know the meanings. They're not going to give you that. That might make things a little bit too easy.
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is you cannot take anything into the exam, full stop. I mean, they're going to allow you to wear clothing, but that's about the extent of it, right? There's definitely no smart watches or smart glasses or, any paper, any notes, dictionaries, nothing.
And they do give you a little dry erase board that you can write on while you are taking the exam. If you want to write some reminders to yourself, like one thing that we recommend to our students, write the word CEO on your whiteboard. That's who you are. And
we recommend that people get it tattooed, Lou. I think that's been the latest recommendation.
Yeah.
On the forehead. Yeah.
But and maybe if you need to calculate a few things, some simple formulas, ALE, SLE, ARO, number of symmetric keys for a few people to communicate securely. You might see something along those lines on the exam, and the whiteboard could come in handy for solving that.
For sure.
All right, we've got 2 minutes left, Rob. I mean, we probably ought to start putting a cap on this.
Yeah, someone's got to come up with a question to stump John with. It's not an easy task, but someone's got to step up here and stump John. But yeah, we got a couple minutes left. So if there's one, have we covered all the major questions from Reddit there, Lou?
Yeah, we've got Reddit covered. I've responded to some of the other ones that are a bit more pointed. And I'll take those offline.
Someone's asking King Candy here, harder to get the experience than passing the exam. John, do you want to speak to that? About the experience requirements, right? If you have a degree, you'll need 4 years, and then what constitutes experience covering those 4 years? Do you want to speak to that, John?
Yeah, sure. I mean, ISC2 requires you to have experience before you can become a full-fledged CISSP. That experience is currently written as 5 years. You can waive one of the years if you have any college or university degree, or if you have other certifications, for example, in anything. Yeah, it doesn't have to be security related or technology related.
Change the degree requirement to be a bit more specific.
Yeah, that's right. And
that was a recent change.
Yeah, and I think what they also require is that you need, relevant experience in at least 2 of the 8 domains, for example, that make up the common body of knowledge of the CISSP or security. But there's so much overlap between the 8 domains that if you have any sort of technology experience or related to that, you can make it fit, basically. So they don't want to stop people from being able to be recognized as good security professionals, competent security professionals. And even if you don't have the experience, you can still go through the process, pass the exam. You'll be recognized as a associate of ISC2, which means if you're missing, let's say, a year of experience, for example, you'll automatically get that full CISSP a year from now, provided that you're working in the security industry, basically. So
yeah, and a lot of what we do in technology has a security component to it. So even if you're working like help desk or something like that, or network admin or something, there's a lot of what we do in these roles, like help desk, like network admin, things like that, that aren't, they don't have a title on them that says security, but there is often security related things that we're doing in those roles that will count as experience. So that's the other thing I would point out, is just, look carefully at your experience. Maybe you didn't have the word security in your title, but that doesn't mean that you weren't doing very security related things that would count as experience on the exam. So just read they change it. So just read the official requirements very carefully. But I think you'll find that a lot of what you do could be counted as security.
Yep.
Naz is asking if we're planning to do any future sessions. Yeah, I think so, depending on how well this is received.
Yeah. Hopefully we won't be chased out of town with pitchforks and something like that. But,
oh, maybe one last question for you, Rob. Capri, how much destination certificate questions app close to real exam? I think he's asking how close are our questions.
Not identical. That's the first thing I'll absolutely say. They're absolutely not identical. And as I said earlier, right, the amount of time required to create questions that are going to look just like real exam questions, no one's got the time to do that. So they are absolutely not identical. What I will say is they're based on our many years of experience teaching the CISSP exam and preparing people for it, and having really good solid understanding of what's on the exam. So the questions cover the sorts of material. There's also questions intentionally in there that are a little bit to left field of like, what, I've never even heard of this before, because that is something you'll experience on the exam, and we want to prepare people for that. We've put an enormous amount of time and effort into creating those questions to be structured similar to real exam questions. So they are quite similar. And this is important. Tell your friends to download the app, go through them, because as John mentioned earlier, a big part of what makes real CISSP exam questions so good is all the statistics that have been gathered. That's what we're doing with the questions in our app. We're gathering statistics, and we're actually using that to weed out questions. We already removed something like 320 odd questions from the app because we could clearly see they were too easy, too hard, or some of the metrics were off. So the more people that go through the app, the more statistics that we can gather helps us refine the question set and to add more questions. So yeah, it's helpful to everyone if you go through those questions. So tell your friends, they're free, right? There's literally zero charge to them. So go through them, learn from them, and they're not identical to real exam questions, but they're darn good. And I think you'll find them very helpful.
Hey, Lou, maybe we end on that question for you.
Eric. Yeah.
Can
Eric,
I close?
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. So, Eric, great question, and I'm glad you asked it because it's actually something I wanted to address earlier. Because I work with students day in, day out. I've been doing it for the last 5 years. I've worked with hundreds of students, and they're at all varying degrees of their professional career. Some are more entry level, but the majority of the people I work with are mid to senior level. So they've got multiple years of experience under their belt. And one of the things that I do see from time to time is students coming in and doing one or both of these things that I'm going to mention. Either A, they underestimate the exam. Often that's a fatal mistake. It's a challenging exam. It's the most challenging exam that I've ever prepared for. And I brought 23 years to the table. Including 18 as an IT director for a global nonprofit. I had multiple Novell and Microsoft certs under my belt from early in my career. And thankfully, I did a lot of research before I even committed to pursuing this. And I realized this is a completely different beast. And I needed to come at it with a big, dose of humility. Like, okay, I'm going to be learning a lot of new stuff, and I'll be encountering things that I know and familiar with. But importantly, I'm stepping into ISC2's world, and I need to understand things the way they expect me to versus the way I may have been doing things in my career. And then the other thing that I often see people do, because they do have years of experience, if they're not underestimating the exam, they're overestimating themselves. And they think, oh yeah, I'm just going to fill in a few blanks and I'm going to plug in those areas that I'm not as proficient or competent on, and I'll be good to go. And that oftentimes is fatal as well. So I caution people to come in humble, knowing that they might know things and their aptitude and their experience will help lend itself well to learning what they need to learn, but they still got to go through the process. So just be real careful in that regard, and then be methodical and consistent in your approach, because it's not really 8 domains. It's one big massive domain, and you're a security professional and you have purview over all of it. And so you need to be able to touch this stuff consistently enough that it will weave together and you'll be able to answer questions. Because one other thing we didn't talk about, and John can speak to this, exam questions are not domain specific. They generally will cross domains, 2 or 3 domains per question. And they are written from that high level, mile wide, inch deep perspective. And you've got to be, again, competent and prepared to understand what's being conveyed, what's being communicated to you, and ultimately what's being asked, so you can then answer with the best answer. All right, that's it.
That's good, Lou. Great.
All right. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. Hopefully we found this valuable.
Yeah. And feel free to drop any of us, Lou at deskcert.com, Rob at deskcert.com, or John at deskcert.com. We'd love your feedback, because to some of the questions, if it's positive, then, and you know, the folks out there bless us to do more of these, then we will. I mean, we want to do more. We want to support the community. But again, we don't want to overstay either.
Yeah, Rob, John, or Lou at deskcert.com if anyone wants to follow up with us. Happy to have a conversation. Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. Really enjoyed doing this. Let's do it again. Thank you for your support.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you guys.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks, John. Bye for now.
Thanks.
Bye.